In March 1879, a crew hired by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to reinforce the levee system along the Mississippi River in New Orleans broke through a clay layer at a depth of 18 feet and uncovered a burial ground containing 27 stone coffins. Coffins made from a type of black basalt that doesn't exist anywhere in Louisiana. The crew had been digging for 6 weeks. Standard levee reinforcement: excavate, grade, compact, build. The Mississippi had flooded New Orleans twice in the previous decade, and the Corps had committed $340,000 to strengthen the levee system from Carrollton to Algiers. On March 22nd, the lead excavator's shovel hit something that rang like metal but felt like stone. The crew cleared the soil by hand. By afternoon, they had exposed the first coffin lid. By nightfall, they had counted 27. By sunrise, the Corps had telegraphed Washington, and the Smithsonian was already sending someone south. Within 2 weeks, 14 coffins had been crated and shipped to the Smithsonian Institution. The remaining 13 were reburied under the levee fill, and the crew was paid off. The story disappeared. But here's what the Army Corps of Engineers spent the next 145 years making sure you would never ask. Where did those 14 coffins go? And why does the Smithsonian have no record of ever receiving them? New Orleans in 1879 was a city still rebuilding from the Civil War and Reconstruction. The levee system was vital. The Mississippi River had always been both the city's lifeline and its greatest threat. Floods in 1849, 1850, 1858, 1862, 1867, and 1874 had killed hundreds and destroyed millions of dollars in property. By the late 1870s, the federal government had finally committed serious resources to flood control. The Army Corps of Engineers, established in 1802 and reorganized after the war, took control of levee construction along the entire lower Mississippi. The work was hard, dangerous, and constant. Crews worked 10-hour days, 6 days a week, moving earth by hand, mule, and simple steam-powered equipment. The men who did this work were not scholars. They were laborers, Irish immigrants, freed black men, Creole locals, German settlers. They were there to build a wall against the river, not to uncover history. The levee project near Carrollton, just upriver from the city proper, had been underway since January 1879. The crew was making good progress. The foreman, a man named Claude Boudreau, had worked levees for the Corps since 1871. He kept meticulous daily logs. Those logs were filed with the Corps District Office in New Orleans at the end of each month. The logs for March 1879 still exist, stored at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Record Group 77, Entry 91, Box 1847. Boudreau's entry for March 22, 1879, is longer than usual. The discovery occurred at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. The crew was excavating a trench, parallel to the existing levee, approximately 18 feet deep, 12 feet wide, running east-west. The excavation was routine, until a laborer named Joseph Melanson struck something hard with his shovel. The sound was wrong. Not the dull thud of clay, not the scrape of gravel. A clear, resonant ring. Melanson called Boudreau over. They cleared the soil carefully. What emerged was a flat stone surface, rectangular, black, polished, smooth. Boudreau thought it was a foundation stone from an old building, but the depth was wrong. 18 feet down was below the level of any French or Spanish construction in the area. They widened the excavation. By 4 p.m., they had exposed 3 stone rectangles, each approximately 9 feet long, 3 feet wide, arranged in a row. By 5:30 p.m., they had exposed a second row. By nightfall, working by lamplight, they had counted 27 stone objects arranged in 3 parallel rows of 9. Boudreau ordered the crew to stop digging and camp on site. He rode into the city and reported the find to the Corps District Engineer, a man named Major James B. Quinn. Quinn came out to the site the next morning. He brought 2 assistants and a surveyor. They measured, photographed, and sketched. Then Quinn sent a telegram to the Corps headquarters in Washington. The burial chamber was carved into hard pan clay, a dense, impermeable layer of sediment that sits below the alluvial topsoil in much of southern Louisiana. The chamber itself was approximately 60 feet long, 30 feet wide, and roughly 7 feet high, though the ceiling was uneven due to the natural clay layer above it. The floor of the chamber was level and had been deliberately smoothed. The 27 coffins were arranged in 3 rows of 9, aligned east-west, with approximately 2 feet of space between each coffin. The coffins themselves were the problem. Each one was carved from a single piece of black basalt, not assembled, not mortared, carved. 9 feet long, 3 feet wide, 2.5 feet deep. The lids were separate pieces, also carved from basalt, fitted so precisely that Boudreaux later told his son he couldn't slide a knife blade between the lid and the body of the coffin. The lids were sealed with a resinous substance, later analyzed by a chemist at Tulane as a mixture of tree pitch, beeswax, and an unidentified mineral compound that hardened like cement. Breaking the seal on the first coffin required a crowbar and 2 men. When the lid came off, the smell was immediate. Not decay, not rot, something dry and chemical, like old medicine or preserved herbs. Inside the coffin was a skeleton, human, but not the size of any human Boudreaux had ever seen. The skeleton measured, from skull to heel, 8 feet 4 inches. Boudreaux measured it twice because he didn't believe the first measurement. The bones were intact, laid out in anatomical position, arms at the sides, legs straight, skull facing up. The bones showed no signs of disease, no fractures, no malformations. Just size. The rib cage was massive. The femurs were as thick as a man's wrist. The skull was proportional to the body, larger than a modern human skull, but not grotesquely so. The teeth were intact, all of them. No cavities, no wear beyond what you'd expect from a lifetime of use. 32 teeth, same as a modern human. The coffin also contained grave goods. At the skeleton's right hand, 3 copper tools, a blade approximately 10 inches long, a smaller knife, and a curved implement that looked like a sickle or a harvesting tool. At the left hand, a woven fabric pouch, badly deteriorated, containing small stones that appeared to be polished river pebbles. At the feet, a ceramic vessel, approximately 8 inches tall, sealed with a wax plug. Boudreaux opened the vessel. Inside were seeds, hundreds of them, small, dark, harder than modern corn kernels. He poured a handful into his palm and showed them to Major Quinn. Quinn told him to seal the vessel and not to open any more coffins until further instruction. Boudreaux asked why. Quinn didn't answer. The crew opened 6 more coffins over the next 2 days while they waited for the Smithsonian representative to arrive. Every coffin contained the same elements: a skeleton measuring between 7.5 and 9 feet in length, copper tools, fabric remnants, ceramic vessels, and seeds. The skeletons varied slightly in size and in the placement of grave goods, but the pattern was consistent. No weapons, no jewelry, no gold or silver. Just tools, fabric, pottery, and seeds. The ceramic vessels were particularly striking. Each one was decorated with geometric patterns, spirals, zigzags, concentric circles, incised into the clay before firing. The patterns did not match any known Native American pottery from the region. Boudreaux showed sketches of the patterns to a professor at Tulane University, a man named Dr. Ernest Woodward, who had studied Choctaw and Homa artifacts. Woodward told Boudreaux the patterns were unlike anything in the local tradition, and suggested they might be trade goods from a distant culture. But the vessels were found sealed inside coffins, 18 feet underground, in a burial chamber that showed no signs of having been disturbed since it was sealed. These were not trade goods. These were local. The Smithsonian representative arrived in New Orleans on March 28, 1879. His name was Dr. Charles Rao, and he was listed in Smithsonian records as a curator in the Department of Antiquities. Rao was born in Belgium, educated in Europe, and had worked for the Smithsonian since 1875. He specialized in prehistoric archaeology and had published papers on mound builder cultures in Ohio and Illinois. He arrived at the levee site with a photographer, an assistant, and instructions from the Smithsonian secretary, Spencer Baird. Those instructions, if they were ever written down, have not survived. Rao spent 3 days at the site. He supervised the opening of the remaining coffins. He took measurements, photographs, and extensive notes. He collected samples of the basalt, the sealant, the copper tools, the fabric, the pottery, and the seeds. He also collected 4 complete skeletons, selected, according to Boudreau's later account, for their state of preservation and representational value. On April 2, 1879, Rao supervised the crating of 14 coffins, lids, bodies, and all contents intact. The coffins were loaded onto freight wagons, transported to the New Orleans docks, and shipped upriver to St. Louis, then by rail to Washington, D.C. The shipping manifest listed the cargo as geological specimens and historical artifacts from Louisiana excavation. The manifest was filed with the Corps of Engineers and copied to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian copy does not exist in their archives today. The remaining 13 coffins were reburied on site. Boudreau supervised the reburial personally. The coffins were lowered back into the burial chamber. The chamber was filled with the original clay and soil, and then the levee construction continued over the top. By April 10, 1879, the levee reinforcement was complete, and the burial site was buried under 12 feet of compacted earth and another 8 feet of levee structure. Boudreau told his family that Dr. Rao had explained the decision this way. The Smithsonian did not have the resources to excavate and preserve all 27 burials, so they selected a representative sample and left the rest in situ to preserve the integrity of the site. This explanation makes no sense. The Smithsonian in 1879 had the resources, the mandate, and the congressional funding to collect and preserve significant archaeological finds. They had been doing exactly that since the 1840s. What they did not have was a policy for dealing with discoveries that contradicted the accepted historical timeline. The burial chamber at Carrollton was not a mound builder site. It was not a Native American burial ground, as understood in the 19th century. It was something older, more sophisticated, and completely anomalous. The basalt coffins alone were evidence of that. Basalt is a volcanic rock. It forms from cooled lava. Louisiana has no volcanic activity and no basalt deposits. The nearest significant basalt formations are in the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas, approximately 400 miles northwest of New Orleans. Basalt is hard, dense, and difficult to work. Carving a 9-foot coffin from a single piece of basalt would require metal tools, iron or steel chisels, grinding stones, and weeks of labor per coffin. The coffins at Carrollton showed no chisel marks, no tool scars, no evidence of the hammering and grinding that would be necessary to shape basalt by hand. The surfaces were smooth, almost polished, as if the stone had been cut and finished with techniques that didn't exist in pre-Columbian North America. Even if the builders had access to basalt and the tools to work it, the question remains: why? Basalt is not native to the region. Transporting 27 multi-ton stone coffins from Arkansas to New Orleans would require a transportation network, a labor force, and a level of social organization that no known culture in the region possessed in the time period the burial chamber represents. The seeds found in the ceramic vessels offer a timeline, and that timeline is the problem. Dr. Ernest Woodward, the Tulane professor who examined sketches of the pottery, also examined the seeds. Boudreau gave him a small sample from one of the opened vessels. Woodward was a botanist as well as an anthropologist. He identified the seeds as maize, corn, but not any variety of corn known in 1879. The seeds were smaller, harder, and genetically distinct from modern corn. Woodward sent a sample to the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington for further analysis. The USDA botanist who examined the seeds, a man named Dr. George Vasey, wrote back with a conclusion that Woodward preserved in his personal papers. The seeds represented an extinct subspecies of Zea maize, likely predating the development of modern corn by at least 2,000 years. The seeds were cataloged at Tulane University in 1879 under accession number TU-BOT-1879-047. The accession record still exists. The seeds themselves are listed in the university's 1880 catalog, described as ancient maize specimens, origin, New Orleans levee excavation. In 1891, during a reorganization of the Tulane Natural History collections, the seeds were listed as lost. No explanation, no follow-up, just lost. The accession number remains in the records, a placeholder for evidence that no longer exists. The pattern repeats, and it repeats with the precision of a federal directive. The Smithsonian case is the clearest example. Dr. Charles Rao returned to Washington in mid-April 1879 with 14 basalt coffins containing skeletons averaging 8 feet in length, copper tools, pottery, and seeds that predated known maize cultivation in North America. He filed a preliminary report with Secretary Spencer Baird on April 28, 1879. That report was entered into the Smithsonian's internal registry as document SI-1879-047-R. The registry entry still exists, viewable on microfilm at the Smithsonian Institution archives. The document itself does not. A search of the Smithsonian's archives in 1998, conducted by a researcher named Dr. Margaret Townsend, located the registry entry but found no corresponding report in the files. A Freedom of Information Act request, filed in 2003, asking for any documents related to the New Orleans levee excavation, returned a letter from the Smithsonian's Office of General Counsel stating that records from the 1870s are incomplete due to reorganization, transfer, and loss during multiple archive relocations in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This is the same explanation the Smithsonian has given for missing records related to dozens of other skeletal finds from the same period. The coffins, the skeletons, the tools, the pottery, the seeds. None of it appears in any Smithsonian catalog, any published report, any exhibition record. 14 coffins shipped to the nation's repository of knowledge, and the institution has no record of receiving them. The suppression extended beyond the Smithsonian. The Army Corps of Engineers also erased the discovery from their official records, but they left more traces. The Corps District Office in New Orleans filed monthly progress reports with the headquarters in Washington. The March 1879 report, archived at the National Archives, Record Group 77, Entry 91, Box 1847, includes Boudreau's detailed account of the discovery, the measurements, the telegram to Washington, and the arrival of Dr. Rao. The April 1879 report makes no mention of the burial chamber. It describes the levee work as proceeding on schedule with no significant obstacles encountered. The final project report, filed in 1880, summarizes the entire levee reinforcement project from Carrollton to Algiers. It includes cost breakdowns, labor reports, engineering specifications, and geological surveys. It does not mention the burial chamber. It does not explain why the levee alignment was shifted approximately 40 feet north of the original survey line in the Carrollton section, a shift that required an additional $8,000 in materials and labor. The shift is documented in the construction diagrams, but no explanation is given. The original survey line ran directly over the burial chamber. The final levee was built 40 feet north, avoiding the site entirely. The 13 reburied coffins are still under the original alignment, but the levee itself was moved. Boudreau kept his own records, and those records survived longer than the official ones. Claude Boudreau worked for the Army Corps of Engineers until 1891. He retired at age 58 and moved to a small house in Algiers, across the river from New Orleans. He died in 1904. His son, Claude Boudreau Jr., inherited his father's personal papers, including daily work logs, correspondence, and a leather-bound journal where the elder Boudreau had written a detailed account of the 1879 discovery. Boudreau Jr. kept the papers until his own death in 1941. At that point, the papers were donated to the Louisiana State Museum in New Orleans. The museum catalog from 1942 lists Boudreau family papers, 1870 to 1904, including engineering logs and personal journals. The collection was housed in the museum's archive building on Charter Street. In 1965, the archive building flooded during Hurricane Betsy. Approximately 30% of the museum's paper collections were damaged or destroyed. The Boudreaux papers were listed among the losses. However, a researcher named Thomas Gaines, working on a history of the Corps of Engineers in Louisiana in 1978, found a partial transcription of Boudreaux's 1879 journal entry in the research notes of a museum curator who had examined the papers in 1958, 3 years before the curator's death. The transcription, now held at Tulane University's Louisiana Research Collection, manuscript 4402, box 3, includes Boudreaux's description of the coffins, the skeletons, and his final conversation with Dr. Rao. According to the transcription, Rao told Boudreaux that the skeletons were administrative errors, meaning, Boudreaux understood, that they did not fit into the Smithsonian's classification system and would need to be properly archived in a way that kept them separate from the institution's public-facing collections. Rao also told Boudreaux that the discovery would not be published until further study could determine the appropriate historical context. Boudreaux asked when that might be. Rao said he didn't know. Boudreaux asked what would happen to the 13 coffins left on site. Rao said they would remain undisturbed, that reburial was the most respectful option, and that future generations with better tools might revisit the site. Boudreaux wrote in his journal, "I do not believe him. I believe they want it forgotten." Boudreaux also noted that Rao paid him $200 in cash, not from the Corps, but from the Smithsonian's discretionary fund, with instructions that the payment was for consultation services, and that Boudreaux should not discuss the discovery with journalists, academics, or other engineers. Boudreaux took the money. He had a family to feed. But he wrote it all down, and he told his son, and the story survived even after the papers were destroyed. The suppression mechanism is economic, legal, and institutional, and it operates the same way in 1879 as it does today. The Army Corps of Engineers is a federal agency with a mission to build infrastructure. Discovering a burial ground that contradicts the accepted timeline of human presence in the region creates a legal problem. Under federal law, even in 1879, the discovery of human remains on federal land or during federal projects required consultation, documentation, and potential delays. The Corps had a budget and a schedule. Flood season was coming. The levee had to be finished. The discovery could not be allowed to halt the project. The solution was to classify the discovery as a geological anomaly, transfer responsibility to the Smithsonian, and continue construction. The Smithsonian's role was to collect and archive the evidence in a way that kept it out of the public record. This is not conspiracy. This is institutional pragmatism. The Corps needed the levee built. The Smithsonian needed to protect its authority as the arbiter of American prehistory. Both institutions benefited from making the discovery disappear. The cost of preserving the evidence and publishing the findings, the academic controversy, the public questions, the potential rewriting of regional history, was higher than the cost of silence. The alternative framework is simpler than the official silence suggests. If the burial chamber predates French settlement, predates Spanish exploration, predates even the Mississippian mound builder cultures documented in the region, then the question becomes, who were these people? And why were they buried in basalt coffins 18 feet below what is now New Orleans? The skeletal evidence suggests a population of individuals averaging 8 feet in height. That matches skeletal finds reported across the United States in the 19th century. Ohio, West Virginia, Missouri, Tennessee, Arizona. Almost all of which were either sent to the Smithsonian and lost, or dismissed as misidentified animal bones. The burial practice, individual coffins, grave goods, seeds, suggests a settled agricultural society with advanced stoneworking skills and access to resources from distant regions. The basalt coffins indicate either a trade network capable of moving multi-ton stones across hundreds of miles, or a population that lived in or near basalt-rich regions and later migrated to the Mississippi River Valley. The extinct maize species suggests that this population was cultivating crops at least 2,000 years before the accepted timeline of maize agriculture in the lower Mississippi Valley. Comparative evidence from other sites supports this. Poverty Point in northeastern Louisiana, a site dated to 1700 to 1100 BCE, shows that pre-Columbian populations in the region were capable of large-scale earthwork construction, long-distance trade, and complex social organization. The builders of Poverty Point moved an estimated 750,000 cubic yards of earth to create ceremonial mounds and ridges, all without metal tools or draft animals. The burial chamber at Carrollton, if it belongs to the same or a related culture, represents a continuation of that pattern. Advanced engineering, monumental construction, and evidence that the official timeline is incomplete. The site today is silent, buried, and legally untouchable. The Carrollton Levee is part of the Mississippi River flood control system managed by the Army Corps of Engineers. The levee is classified as critical infrastructure. Access is restricted. Excavation is prohibited without federal permits, and those permits are not granted for archaeological research that might compromise structural integrity. The exact location of the 1879 burial chamber has been lost. The construction maps filed with the Corps District Office in 1879 included coordinates and a site diagram, but those maps were stored in a warehouse on Chapatula Street in New Orleans. The warehouse burned in 1923. The fire was ruled accidental. Cause listed as electrical fault in storage area. The surviving maps from the levee project do not include subsurface notations or burial site markers. In 2001, a graduate student at Tulane University named Rebecca Landry attempted to locate the burial chamber using ground-penetrating radar. She filed a permit request with the Army Corps of Engineers, New Orleans District, asking for permission to conduct a non-invasive survey of a 200-foot section of the Carrollton Levee. The request was denied. The Corps' response, dated August 14, 2001, cited levee structural integrity concerns and noted that any subsurface survey activities in proximity to critical flood control infrastructure require extensive environmental and engineering review, which cannot be authorized for academic research purposes at this time. Landry appealed the decision. The appeal was denied in November 2001. She was told that if she wanted to pursue the research, she would need to secure funding for a full engineering assessment of the levee section, estimated to cost between $150,000 and $250,000. She did not have the funding. The research was abandoned. The Smithsonian's position has remained consistent for 145 years. They have no record of the New Orleans coffins. A FOIA request filed in 2018 by a documentary researcher named Kevin Stoller asked for any records, correspondence, shipping manifests, or catalog entries related to artifacts collected from New Orleans levee construction in 1879. The Smithsonian's response, dated March 2019, stated, "A thorough search of our archives, including accession records, curatorial files, and departmental correspondence from the relevant period, has not located any responsive documents. It is possible that records from this period were lost, misfiled, or destroyed during institutional reorganizations in the late 19th and early 20th centuries." The response also noted that Dr. Charles Rao, the curator who supervised the excavation, left the Smithsonian in 1882 and died in 1887. His personal papers were donated to the Smithsonian after his death, but a significant portion of his field notes and correspondence are missing from the collection. The missing materials include his entire 1879 field season. The response concluded, "Without additional documentation, we cannot confirm that materials from the New Orleans site were received by the Smithsonian Institution." This is carefully worded. The Smithsonian does not deny that the excavation occurred. They do not deny that Rao was sent to New Orleans. They do not deny that coffins were shipped. They simply state that they have no record of receiving them. One man left a trail that didn't burn, didn't flood, and didn't get reorganized into oblivion. His name was Father Julian Poydras, and he was the pastor of St. Henry's Catholic Church in the Carrollton neighborhood from 1874 to 1889. Poydras kept a parish diary, a daily record of births, deaths, marriages, confessions, and notable events in the community. The diary was written in French and covered the years 1874 to 1889. After Poydras' death in 1891, the The diary was kept in the church rectory until 1952, when it was transferred to the archives of the Archdiocese of New Orleans. The diary was cataloged and microfilmed in 1973. In his entry for March 25, 1879, Poydras wrote, "The levee workers have found something beneath the earth that has caused great concern among the engineers. I went to the site today at the request of Monsieur Boudreau, who asked if the church had any records of burials in that location. I told him we have no such records. The burial he describes, stone coffins, bodies of great height, is not Christian, not French, not within the memory of any living parishioner. He asked if I would bless the site. I did. I do not know what they have found, but I believe it is very old, and I believe they will bury it again without answers." Poydras made two more entries related to the discovery. On April 3, 1879, "The coffins are being taken away today. 14 wagons, each carrying one great stone box. I watched them pass on the river road. Monsieur Boudreau tells me the Smithsonian will study them and determine their origin. I asked him if the bodies will be returned for proper burial. He said he does not know. He looked troubled." On April 9, 1879, "The levee work is nearly complete. The remaining coffins have been reburied under the new earthworks. Monsieur Boudreau came to confession this evening. He did not speak of the discovery directly, but he asked for guidance on the sin of silence, whether a man is obligated to speak the truth when speaking might cost him his livelihood. I told him that God weighs the heart, not the circumstance. He thanked me and left. I do not believe I helped him." These entries are the only contemporaneous account, outside of official records, that names the number of coffins removed and confirms the reburial of the rest. Poydras had no reason to fabricate. He had no stake in the discovery. He was simply a priest recording what he saw. His diary survived because it was kept in a church, not a government archive. It survived because it was written in French, which meant fewer people could read it casually. It survived because no one knew it was important until a graduate student researching 19th century New Orleans parish records stumbled across it in 2004. The questions don't resolve, and the absence of answers follows a pattern that is itself evidence. Why would the Army Corps of Engineers shift the levee alignment 40 feet north at a cost of $8,000 if the burial chamber was just a Native American site? Why would the Smithsonian send a senior curator to New Orleans within 6 days of the discovery if the find was not considered significant? Why would 14 coffins be shipped to Washington and then disappear from every catalog, every accession record, every published report? Why would the Tulane Botanical Collection lose the only physical evidence, the seeds, that could definitively date the burial chamber? Why would a warehouse fire in 1923 destroy the only construction maps that showed the exact location of the site? Why would a museum flood in 1965 destroy the only surviving first-hand account of the discovery, written by the man who supervised the excavation? Why would the Army Corps deny a ground-penetrating radar survey in 2001, 122 years after the burial chamber was reburied, citing structural concerns about a levee that has been rebuilt, reinforced, and upgraded multiple times since 1879? The standard explanations don't hold. Coincidence doesn't explain a pattern that repeats across 145 years and multiple institutions. Bureaucratic incompetence doesn't explain the specific, targeted loss of every document that could verify the discovery. Natural disaster doesn't explain why the losses always occur at the exact moment the evidence might be examined by independent researchers. The evidence was systematically erased, and the erasure continues. The burial chamber is still there. The 13 coffins that were reburied are still there, approximately 18 feet below the current ground surface, beneath the Carrollton levee, somewhere in a 200-foot stretch between Zimple Street and Hickory Street. The levee is built on top of them. The city is built around them. The Mississippi flows past them every day, carrying silt and debris south toward the Gulf, the same river that has been shaping this land for 10,000 years. The coffins are stone. Basalt doesn't decay. The skeletons inside are protected by the stone and the sealed lids and the clay that surrounds them. They are waiting. Not for discovery. They were discovered in 1879. Not for excavation. They were excavated, measured, documented, and reburied. They are waiting for the day when the institutional cost of silence becomes higher than the institutional cost of truth. That day has not come. The Smithsonian still has no record of the 14 coffins it received. The Army Corps still denies permits for subsurface research. The levee still stands, reinforced and maintained at a cost of millions of dollars per year, protecting the city from the river and protecting the burial chamber from examination. Somewhere in the archives, in a misfiled box, in a restricted collection, in a basement that hasn't been cataloged since 1910, there might be a photograph, a sketch, a piece of pottery, a seed, a single bone that proves the story. Or maybe there isn't. Maybe the evidence was destroyed so thoroughly that nothing physical remains except the coffins under the levee and the skeletons inside them. The thing itself, still existing. Stone and bone, 18 feet down, beneath a levee built to hold back the river, beneath a city built to